Hello and welcome to a brand new show that we like to call The State of It, presented by me, David Mintz. And today we're going to be talking about the state of it, but the state of the private rented sector with none other than my guest, Ben Beadle, the leader of the National Residential Landlords Association. How are you doing, Ben?
David, good morning to you. I'm radiant, thank you. How are you?
I am a little less than radiant today, but I'm going to try and keep up with you. And trying to keep up with you is difficult because anybody that's followed you on social media will know that this man never stops, seemingly never sleeps. There is an invisible sun that provides its energy to the one that is known as Ben Beadle. Ben, you're everywhere, man. You're at every political conference. You were seen chasing Liz Truss around the country, trying to ask her questions when she was in the leadership race. You are here, you are there, you're on every cover of every magazine, you're in the newspapers, you're constantly being quoted, you're on national television, you're on the radio. Where does it come from? Where's that work ethic come from?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. If you're passionate about something, David, you don't look at it as work. For me, this job has been very much my calling. I've been in the business for 20 years. Despite my youthful and fabulous appearance, it's something I've always wanted to do. And I don't go into doing things in a half-hearted sort of way. So yeah, I want to be everywhere. I want to be fighting the fight for our sector because I'm passionate about our sector and it's under attack.
Now you refer to it as our sector. I refer to it as our sector. And traditionally, a lot of people might see you and me sitting on opposite sides of a table because I may represent agents and you might represent landlords. Now, do you know what they say about you behind your back, by the way?
Because I read all the comments. I'm going
to tell you. It's not what you might think. So it's interesting because I overheard another agent, excellent agents, lots to say on every subject, but particularly when they were talking about the NRLA, almost in a throwaway comment, they said, "Oh well, they're most of their customers, most of the people that they represent are self-managed landlords. So those aren't people really that we engage with or talk to." Isn't that just part of the problem here, that we see this split within an industry when in fact we're part of one very big and dysfunctional family?
I agree, David, and I think I'm very much a collaborator. As you know, I don't look at agents as being the enemy in any way, shape, or form. To be honest with you, I see us as collaborators. As you guys are in touch with a lot of the people I want to be in touch with, and I would have thought that we're in touch with a lot of the people that you would like to convert into a customer base. There's plenty of the pie to go round, and actually half of our membership are self-managed, the other half use agents. And I think I'm very keen to sort of get away from this argument that the NRLA is just about self-managing. Actually, NRLA is about giving landlords a voice, and we're doing that. Matters not to me whether you use an agent or otherwise, to be honest with you. I think if you're busy and you're not able to keep up with compliance, you should use an agent. But that doesn't preclude you from joining a trade body, a representative body that's got your interests at heart. Because as you know, if agents cock things up, it's always the landlord that ends up carrying the ultimate legal can, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? I think there's so much to be gained for us in all sort of getting out of this us and them mentality and making an appeal on behalf of an entire combined industry. And I would even expand that further, Ben. It includes landlords, it includes tenants, it includes every agent in the country. It should include surveyors and people whose livelihoods depend on the vitality of an active property market. But going one step further than that, it should also include the house builders who, let's face it, carry a lot of clout in Westminster due to the money, which underpins a vast amount of our economy, which is one of the reasons why back in May 2019, when the then housing minister, I don't know, we've had about 27 since then, but I think it was Robert Jenrick actually sent us all back to work. And he sent our sector back to work, and we couldn't work out why that was, why we were so important, we were so special. But it transpired that we were vital to keeping the economy going. Why doesn't that carry more clout in Westminster?
Well, I think it does carry clout. I think government do recognise that, and Robert recognised that when when that announcement was made. I guess what we're getting into really is housing not just being a essential to the economy, but actually a political hot potato. That's booted around. That's and we've seen it in the last couple of weeks, haven't we? A big focus on housing at the Labour Party conference and how it should be changed, and similarly, the Tories adopting a classic Tory policy in terms of wanting to turn everybody into a nation of homeowners. I think both of the arguments are slightly delusional, given where we are with life, but I still think politicians recognise it as being an incredibly important issue and factor, but it is heavily politicised, not just in terms of the contribution that it makes to the economy, about who should be owning homes, who should be in what particular sector. The debate's really only just got underway, I think.
I think it is super interesting the way that certain organisations communicate with government on our behalf. And we're gonna talk about that in a minute. Let's start with the way that you communicate, which I've got to say is absolutely unique, and I love it because you leave no room for misinterpretation of where it is that you stand. You do not dance around the political niceties. You are not walking on eggshells. You understand that to get business done in Westminster, you need to walk in there and shout loud enough to be heard. But particularly, you'll finish an interaction with a politician and you'll take to social media straight afterwards. You won't wait. There'll be no shiny press release the next morning. There's no polished words. You called a politician the other day an odious woman, and you can tell us a little bit more about that. But that, my friend, if I could put it in plain speaking language, takes balls. It takes political balls of huge proportions, because what it means is there's no sense of ambiguity. You can't hide behind, sentiments and half almost this half version of the truth that we often get that is polished up. And I think that's amazing because, yes, you're willing to put your own views on the line, but you're also holding them to ultimate account, that they know that if they speak an untruth to you or they go on the record as saying something to you, you're quite happy to put that out there and for them to be hung by that.
And I think I'm very direct in my communications, which actually is quite a new thing for us, because I want my members to know what we're doing on their behalf. That we are not a stuffy trade association that can't talk about stuff. Do you know what I mean? That was what I came into, was sort of where we do things behind closed doors. We do this, that, and the other. No, we don't. I can say who I'm meeting, and I'll tell you what was said. Obviously, if there was something in there, and we had to be a little bit careful, sort of during COVID, given the conversations that we were having. We are an organisation that political parties can do business with. They can trust us. But they can trust us also to tell the truth in the purest sense. So Natalie Elphick, which is the lady to which I referred, I was not happy with what she said. And I was not happy with what she said because she was protecting her own political backside. She is speaking in populist terms to keep in power locally after taking on the seat from her disgraced ex-husband. And that's why she's saying what she's saying about rent control. And at that particular meeting where I challenged her, she was very not just dismissive, but she was deliberately provocative back about my audience. And I'm sorry, I'm going to defend that every time. And I'm going to call it out. And, I'm really keen that, I know that we get a bit of stick sometimes, around which side of the argument that we come down on. What I would say is, I want to communicate very directly with the landlord community, and the wider community as well, because, whilst it's my job to represent landlords, actually I tend to form the view that that actually what's good for landlords is also good for tenants, is good for agents.
Yeah.
And so that's why you also see me talking to Polly of Shelter and doing a podcast with Polly about our areas of difference, because I think, she's representing tenants, we're representing landlords, but actually there is some accord in between. We get on fine. She will call for things because she needs to call for them, we will call for things because we need to call for them, but the truth is probably somewhere in between. And I think it's really important that certainly the membership know that we're big enough to be having those arguments and discussions. We don't want to be unpleasant about people. That's not the way we do business, not the way I do business. But it is about being able to have a sensible dialogue with a whole range of different stakeholders and trying to find areas of commonality.
So the gloves are off, aren't they, really, when it comes to getting the job done? You all respect each other professionally at the end of the day, but you all also respect the fact that you're not going to let your side down. She's not likely to back down in an argument either. And you're willing to put both on the record, which I think is fantastic. And this way of fighting with our gloves off, there's a sense that there is another large organization in our industry. I'm not going to name them by name. Maybe I should do a Ben Beadle and name them by name. But okay, let's name them by name. Why am I not seeing Nathan Emerson walking out of a party political conference going, I've just had a chat with Natalie Elphick and I've tried to push her on this, that, and the other. There's always a sense that, I've spoken to Nathan. We have very open dialogue. I'm a member of his organization. I should go on record as saying as well. And I think they've got the potential to do massive good. What frustrates me often with Property Mark can be the fact that they are too reserved and there's too much going on behind closed doors, and they choose to sort of portray that as being that is the necessity of doing business in Westminster, means that you cannot talk about it publicly because you undermine your chances of getting anything done, and people will no longer trust you within the corridors of power. Do you think if Nathan and his organization were to change their way of doing things, they'd get more done, Ben?
Well, what I would say, I get on very well with Nathan. He's a great chap, and many friends at Property Mark, and they do a fabulous job. What I would say is, we work very collaboratively with people like Nathan and his team. He was, or his colleagues were, at the Scottish Parliament this week, giving evidence around rent control and eviction ban. So I guess you have to pick your battles. I wouldn't be critical, but I would say that there's plenty of scope for joining forces on particular issues, and we look to do that. We have a really good dialogue, and we will be making a joint announcement next week about rent control and evictions in Scotland. We don't cover Scotland, we cover it through our partnership with the Scottish Association of Landlords. But there's obviously a lot of nonsense going on up there at the moment, and it's important that governments down here south of the border know that if there is the threat of rent control and eviction ban elsewhere, that they know that the NRLA will challenge it. So I've probably broken various embargoes by telling you that, but there is a joint announcement coming next week.
The handle that entire question. If we were to look at one of your more recent podcasts that you did, I think, together with Polly from Shelter. It is clear that she had her script, if you like, that she was sticking to in terms of the evils of the private rented sector and landlords. And I know that she kept referring to it as a minority, but her literature, her adverts don't paint us as being a minority. And particularly when it came to Section 21 and the whole issue around that, it is something that they're extremely proud of, if you like, that they feel that is the single biggest achievement. A lot of us out there on a day-to-day basis, though, that deal with all sorts of people that are experiencing homelessness. I think we see very little evidence that Shelter is actively helping to get people into new accommodation. And I know one of their key pushes is to sort of try and keep people in accommodation for as long as possible. How effective do you think that they've been?
Well, I mean, they don't house anybody. They're not a housing provider. It's an ironic name, isn't it? But they keep people in their home off the back of others, and they provide an important function and support to the most vulnerable in society. I wouldn't knock them for that. I think they're great campaigners. We have different views on life, David, as you know. And the bit that I took Polly to task on, that I have been cross about, and this follows on from my open letter a few months ago, which was sort of widely published, is this constant demonization of a group of people who are fundamentally good, who are providing homes, who are doing right by their tenant, who are getting great satisfaction results consistently through independent surveys run by government of tenants, saying that they have a really good experience in the private rented sector. So part of that podcast, even just to hear Polly acknowledge that it is a minority, that the majority of landlords are good, is a small victory somewhere, and that might have been why we wanted to have done it.
It definitely is. And what was interesting was that she claimed that there was no evidence that that sort of abolishing Section 21s or even changing the legislation around that has in any way reduced supply of properties to the market, or actually exacerbated the homelessness problem.
Well, I think we agree to disagree on that. The sector in Scotland is, if I put it politely, in a state of flux. Have to pronounce that carefully. But it is in a state
well fluxed.
It's been fluxed over time and time again, dear boy. And what I would say to you is that you need to have confidence in the sector. This is the private rented sector. This is the clue's in the name. It's the private sector. It's not charitable organisations coming in running things at a loss. Look at the social sector for a moment. Rents were increased 4.1% in April, and the latest storm on the horizon, or train crash coming, is what will happen to rents in April of next year. And government are already consulting about raising them 3%, 5%, 7%, or 9%. I think that may not be entirely accurate, but I think there's 3 or 4 choices about what they're asking people about. And the social sector have said, the National Housing Federation, that actually if you cap rents, then we will not be able to deliver on some of our new build targets, our new homes. And this is the point that that I'm making. Profit, a sustainable profit, is not a dirty word. It has to be, you've got to treat people fairly, of course you have, and we wouldn't expect anything less. But there's no such thing as a free lunch in this world, unless you go out with Simon Whale, obviously, in which case there's loads of free lunches. Love Simon for
every
that.
day, is it? It's full of free lunches with Simon Whale. But you're 100% right. If I can just pick up on that.
Yeah.
What interested me most was that you were making a very compelling argument for taxation, which Polly said, well, I don't know how taxation affects an industry, but we know that taxation can be used to effectively it's going to put a stranglehold on
Exactly.
supply.
Well,
It's
that's
going
what
to
it's doing.
it's going to prevent fresh landlords coming into the game. It's going to mean that if you combine that with a bit of a housing boom, as we've seen recently, you've got the perfect storm for landlords to say, you know what, sod this, I'm out of here, I'm selling up and I'm moving on. Now, you made the compelling argument that landlords are not the same as a homeowner. They deserve tax breaks because they're operating a business, and any business, in order to survive, and Kwasi Kwarteng would probably back me up on this, needs reasonable tax breaks in order to make sure that they're able to carry on working profitably. And that impacts also on the quality of stuff that they're able to provide to the market. And I thought that's exactly the way to approach this.
Well, I mean, frankly, I don't think we've got a better opportunity with this lot in charge now. Low tax, pro growth. You know, that's it. That's exactly what we want. But yeah, the reason why we're in this mess, and 260,000 homes have left the sector in the last 4 years. So the sector is declining. It is regressing. Call it what you want, but it's not getting bigger. It's shrinking. And at the same time, we are seeing rents increase at a rate that we haven't seen for some time. Now, I get that is also exacerbated by cost of living, mortgage prices, the cost of getting repairs done, and all of those sorts of things. But the reality is, if the sector is not a sexy place to be, and I'm not talking, punishing returns on your investment, but if you're only making 1 or 2%, I mean, mate, why bother? Stick it under the mattress and put your feet up. So you want to have an environment that people want to invest in, that people want to stay in. And I think respectfully, I think that is something that Shelter and other groups should be interested in, because we need to move away from an ideology here. The ideology, of 40, 50 years or so ago, of, way before our time, obviously, of controlled rents, of choked off supply, of poor condition. That's not a place that we want to be. And I think it is attractive at the moment. We as a group, we are the nation's whipping boys, maybe ever so slightly looking on to our friends the traffic warden in fond memory of where we could be. But we are the whipping boys, and I think that is an unfair place to be. And I think that, frankly, government have got an opportunity to make it a sexier place to be for the benefit of everybody in it. Because if you choke off supply, if you go back to the dark days of yesteryear of rent caps, then nobody wins. Nobody wins. And, ideologically, it may be appealing. And we saw some of that at the Labour Party conference. But every ideology needs a sprinkling of pragmatism. And that's what I hope to be able to bring to the table.
The Labour Party have become so. In fact, I blame the Labour Party for allowing the Tories to effectively make a very easy tax grab out of landlords, because they're under Corbyn, as an opposition, they were so left wing that the Tories knew that whatever changes they made that toughened up on landlords, Labour were effectively never, ever going to speak out about that, because they traditionally take this extreme left stance that means that landlords are intrinsically evil.
Yeah, that's right.
And they were never going to stand up and beat the Tories down for it. So all of this tax changes, they just flew through. Now, if you go back to the days of Tony Blair, who I have to tell you, I'm beginning to remember very, very fondly now, but a centre-left government that knew what was right for business and also understood what we needed to do in terms of provisions for housing. To me, we've taken a real backward step.
Yeah, I think that's right. But what I would say on these sort of Labour calls that we saw at conference, they're in opposition now, aren't they? And it's much easier in opposition to come up with a whole range of vote winning policies around social housing, which per se is not a bad idea. It's exactly what we need. But it's more the rhetoric, the 100 days renters charter, have pets, do what you want to the property. that sounds good, you know, to win a vote. But the reality is, and I'm meeting Lisa Nandy's team on the 8th of November to talk through a more pragmatic outcome to some of these policies. I suspect and hope that the announcement of what they're going to do will be met with a dose of realism when they come into power, because I don't think there's any doubt that they will, with the current establishment in performing how they are.
Because it's one of these unspoken truths, isn't it? Really, that the public rented sector. I mean, you speak this truth the whole time, but everybody else tends to sort of bury their heads in the sand. But under the sort of extreme right-wing conservative government, it's unlikely we're going to see a firm commitment to building more houses for the social sector. It's just simply not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I was, as you know, at the Tory conference as well, and there was actually, the PRS didn't get mentioned once in the Secretary of State's speech. And you know, talking to some fairly senior politicians, you know, they are backing the build to rent sector and they're backing home ownership. You know, that's it. And you know, the point I was able to make, and that's fine, you know, back build to rent, that's fine. We need more of every tenure, right? But I love
build to rent as a concept. When we talk about housing shortage, it is the ultimate let them eat cake, as far as I'm concerned, because we're talking about affordable housing, and build to rent tends to sort of represent a sector that is luxury accommodation for those that can afford it and wish to live in a almost like a hotel with services on tap. I'm thinking about keeping families warm this winter, that's all. So it's funny that has become such a thing at this time.
And I agree, and I think, you know, there might be a more cynical side about why they like these sort of corporate landlords and developers more than the individual. You may say that, I couldn't possibly comment, but I think what is attractive to them is that they are adding to the overall net supply of housing on a bigger scale that individual landlords can do. But the reality is that that pipeline will take several years to come to fruition. It takes a long time, and if every build to rent home is built that's currently in the pipeline, the sector will still only make up about 4.5% of the overall housing stock, whereas the PRS is roughly at 20%. So there is that, and you're right. You know, the build to rent sector, which I used to work in, by the way, it's great if you want a cheese and wine evening on a Tuesday night. You know, fill your boots. But I suspect that's not what most people are looking for. The good news for landlords is that they probably make our properties look cheap by comparison. So that's why I say, you know, by all means, build to rent's got its place, but it needs to have a menu of other things, which should include social housing, but should also include the private rented sector as well. And that's really the point that we're trying to make. I think, you know, this sort of fixation on turning everybody into homeowners is admirable but unrealistic in the current climate. And if you want to do that as a policy direction, you need to make sure that the pathway to home ownership is as steady and as stable as it possibly can be. And at the moment, we see rents, we see a diminishing stock, and we see rents going up, affordability, you know, figures kind of going out the window. You're not going to achieve your home ownership aspirations unless you back the private rented sector.
It's almost a cultural thing with the British, I tend to find, because if you spend any time abroad, particularly in Europe, a lovely place that we used to be a part of, but we left it in a hurry. But if you go out there and you have a look at their rented sector and the way that landlords and tenants behave, it is a lot more businesslike, but it's also this whole thing of having to own a home isn't the most important thing. That you find much longer term tenancies in places like Germany, for instance, where tenants' rights are pretty well protected, but they very rarely move. They tend to sort of stay for a long time. They invest in the homes that they live in. And it's that sort of outlook, because many people are quite happy to live in a nice standard of rental accommodation, don't need to own. We've sort of, from as kids, been sort of fed this myth of an Englishman's home is his castle, so let him buy one. And why would you spend money making your landlord rich when you should be making your bank rich instead, and go and rent the house off them? Because effectively, let's face it, that's what a mortgage is, folks. So, to me, we over egg that cake, don't we? Isn't it time to sort of say, look, renting's not a dirty word, it's fine?
Yeah, I think that's right, David. And I think, the point that we're also trying to make about the private rented sector is that it has improved significantly over the past 10 years, both in terms of satisfaction, but also the safety elements as well. I think the only fly in the ointment there is that we have to concede that there's room for improvement, right? And that's why, we are big supporters of something planned called the Decent Homes Standard. Why would landlords be worried about having a standard to which they should aspire to when 79% already meet the Decent Homes Standard in its current form? And I think it sort of portrays an image that somehow the social sector is somehow light years ahead of the private rented sector. This standard has been in for 20 years, and that figure of 79% meeting it in the PRS is eclipsed by the social housing sector meeting it by 87%. Not a huge amount, right? There's not a huge difference. So I would be arguing to say that, even on a voluntary basis, the vast majority of landlords want to have their homes to a good or excellent standard, right? And so having a standard where safety and condition is paramount is pretty basic to me.
Absolutely. You talk about your members and the landlords, and I think if we can just put this into perspective, it is staggering how many people you represent as an organization, and still there be. I mean, we started the conversation by saying that there is amongst some circles a bit of a split as to where the NRLA sit and where agents might sit. But agents are a tiny fraction compared to the amount of landlords that you have on board. I mean, you've got over 95,000, it's probably closer to 100,000 today. That's a lot of bums on seats, isn't it?
Well, I'm really pleased with the sort of growth we've managed to have since we completed the merger a couple of years or so ago. So we're at a smidge over 99,000. So that countdown to 100,000 is well underway. But it also is about the homes that those individuals provide, and we estimate that our members make up roughly about 600,000 homes in the private rented sector. So it's a significant contribution. But if you put that number of landlords in the context of the number of people that declare income on land on their tax returns, circa 2 million, there's plenty for us to be tapping into. And I'm really, really keen to sort of showcase and the good work that I think the association is doing, so that we can grow in a more significant way over the next few years.
It's some fantastic work that you're doing, and you're asking key questions of key individuals. You've spent some time at the party conferences. As I mentioned earlier, you were at some of the hustings as well, in the Conservative Party version of Britain's Got Talent. It turns out that we had a winner that very quickly became a loser in that first week. Where do you think she goes from here? And what are your hopes in terms of what they've learned from this first couple of weeks in power, as it were?
Well, I may quote my favorite 80s classic and sing "The Only Way Is Up," because I think it's been
as long as you don't use M people, you're okay here.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's obviously been a tricky few weeks or a couple of weeks for Liz Truss. I don't know that I envy her position. It's very clear to me to see that she needs to unite the party very, very quickly, because it is not united at the moment. There is division. You have Gove running around all over the place, clearly stirring the pot. All of the sort of hustling, all of the fringe events at the conference, wanting to be noticed. So I think she's got her work cut out. And I think I like what she stands for personally. I'm a blue, so I like the low tax pro growth agenda that she stands for, and I think she needs to deliver on some of that. But she also talk about sort of cutting welfare to fund some of this stuff is another delusional policy that's going to end in an absolute disaster. So we need to be supporting those who are the most vulnerable.
Why don't we make it easy for them? Why don't we scrap the second homes penalty for landlords effectively? Let's bring down taxation. Let's allow them to claim back more of their costs. And let's load the taxation on the back end of it if they try to sell the property. That way, we've got more of an incentive to keep properties in the private rented sector and churning over. Do you think that might feature in the next budget?
Crikey, there's a lot of water to pass under the bridge between now and the 23rd of November. But you will be hopefully unsurprised to know that we have our wish list in with Kwasi Kwarteng. So there's a few things that we want to see. So firstly, we want to see a reform to the benefits system to prevent arrears in the first place, unfreezing LHA rates, ending the 5-week wait, and arranging direct payment to landlords from the outset. And it follows that any sort of perception that funding improvements off the back of cutting support for the most vulnerable is not a policy that we would think would be acceptable. The second thing that we would like to see is that we'd like to see access to discretionary housing payments to those not in receipt of benefits. So you have DHP as a top up to those that are on benefits. We would like to see that for a short period made available to those who aren't quite poor enough to access benefits but are having a really crappy time. And there's already a mechanism for things like that through local authorities. So we really want to see that. The third thing that we want to see is actually, I'd like to see a scrapping to the energy bill support scheme and repurpose that money, because at the moment, and it's kicked in, but at the moment it's paid in 6 installments, 2 of £66 and 4 of £67. It might be the other way around. Either way, A, that doesn't touch the sides, and B, it deliberately, in my view, puts landlords and tenants against each other when it comes to bills included. Yeah. And so I'd much rather just give everybody 400 quid.
Yeah.
And give it in one go. Yeah. So we'd like to see that. I don't know that we will, but that's the logic. And then we need to see measures to really address the supply crisis in the sector. So, 2 things that we want to see. You mentioned the additional rate of stamp duty. This is a regressive tax. It prevents investment. We need investment and we need low tax. So, for me, even if it was for a limited period of time to stimulate the economy, that would be a no-brainer. And the second thing that we want to see is we don't want there to be an exodus of the sector. So we want to make it palatable for people to stay. And simply, following Scotland around having rent caps and preventing evictions for rent arrears is an unacceptable policy. So let's try and lower the cost base for the sector and reverse the Section 24 mortgage interest changes.
All sensible stuff, none of which I can argue with. And I wish you the best of luck in shouting loud enough so that these people actually hear and take it on board. But actually, I think it's tremendously good business for them if they want to be seen as pro-growth, to back that side of the economy. And yes, there'll be some people that will complain that landlords are our fat cat landlords are going to be creaming off the rest of us. But let's be honest, those are few and far between, and there've been some extremely lean years that have passed over the past sort of 10 years, which have really destroyed what used to be a very sort of vibrant and buoyant sector. And God knows it affects enough people. We can see that by the amount of members that you've got. Talking of your members, how many agent members have you got? And how do we boost this? How do we get more agents on board and pulling in the same direction?
Yeah, well, within that, we've probably got a couple of thousand smaller agents that use our sort of corporate and business membership. You know, we don't lobby for agents, but obviously we lobby on the interests of landlords, by which, you know, kind of agents will benefit by natural default. But yeah, I mean, you know, I'd encourage people to get involved with the association. It's not pitch particularly, but you know, we're always looking at growing what we do. And you know, I think we've got a really good offer for people around, not just in terms of the lobbying and the political analysis and what you know, the doors that we're managing to get behind, God knows how, but also around the sort of range of information that's available, the, you know, 140 plus templates and tenancy agreements that people can use, the much treasured advice line. We had 2,900 calls last week, which was a record for us, 2,944. And that just sort of shows to me that you know, the sort of demand and support that the membership that landlords and agents are needing.
I must tell you that we, as a company, years ago, and this is going back to when I owned the agency, we left another organization and we came to the NRLA, particularly because I think you might have been the RLA back in those days.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because the advice line was tremendous, and the depth of knowledge that you guys have and the care that you went to check some of the documents we were serving. No, it was no trouble. It was very matter of fact, dead quick, and a load of resources behind the scenes as well, in terms of documents and things that you can serve, and explanations and stuff in plain English so that tenants and landlords can understand it. You offer great value, my friend. Let me tell you.
Bless you. You know, we're really serious about what we do, as you know, David, and I love what we do. But you know, we're really keen to make sure we've got the right sort of commercial providers as well. You know, we just had a deal with Carpetright where members get 15% off. Leveraging our size to get the very best for our members from the very best providers at the very best rates is something that we're also very keen on, because you can do much more together. And I think people look at the NRLA as a trusted brand, and we don't take that lightly. So we're not going to jump into bed with anybody, and we're going to make sure that we have the very best tools at our members' disposal so that they can execute their functions really, really well. And that's good for the sector.
All power to you. I think you're doing tremendous amounts of work for our sector as a whole, and I think we need to see some more uniformity. I think we all need to get on the Ben Beadle diet, because I think it really is conducive for bringing about change. I don't think we should let our politicians hide. I think we should be asking the difficult questions. I think we should be talking to people like Shelter, even though seemingly we have nothing in common. We need to give the other side of the debate, because if you only let one side have a voice, the public, as we know from what's been going on in the media for the past 2 or 3 weeks, they are what they eat in terms of what they consume. And if we're not pointing out some good representation of our industry, who else is going to do it for us?
I totally agree. And I think, publicly we need to ensure we're making that argument on behalf of the sector and behalf of landlords as well. But you'll see a slightly different tone to some of our press releases than you will on my social media, for obvious reasons. I have a team that waters down what I say, which is why I like to talk to people directly and really put people on the spot about where we agree, where we disagree. But look, we are collaborators. We want to work with people, because you can't do these things by yourself. And I don't pretend we get everything right, but we listen, we learn, and we are absolutely have our members' backs.
Awesome. They're very lucky to have you out there doing it. And thank you for everything that you continue to do for our industry. We will check in with you another time, but thanks for telling us how it is in the private rented sector today.